Welcome, folks. Wendy's here with us. It's going to be a great show. Wendy, they found the biggest dinosaur they've ever seen on North America.
In North America?
North America.
How big?
There he is.
Wow.
20,000 or 19,500 pounds. He's a T-Rex. He's the biggest one they've ever seen. And they wanted to celebrate the discovery, and all they had to drink was a bottle of scotch, so they called him Scotty. I'm serious.
That works.
19,500 pounds. He's about twice as big as the biggest elephant, but that fella is really huge. And he was living about 200 million years ago, and he was up in Saskatchewan, and it looks like an asteroid hit the Earth, and it extincted the dinosaurs. It was like a tropical paradise up there with all these creatures. Isn't that interesting?
I've been to Saskatchewan. I've been there.
It's a big territory.
But I didn't see
north of Canada. But that's where he was, and so they had to dig him out. The bones were there, and they took a long time to dig out his skull and the various bones, but they've got the intact Tyrannosaurus Rex. Okay, that's our interesting news, but here's something else. Michelle Obama is publishing history. Her book is called Becoming. It sold nearly 10 million copies, and it's on a race to become the best-selling memoir in history. It's a fantastic return for Random House Publishing, which paid the former First Lady and President Barack Obama an eye-popping $60 million advance for a book deal. How about them apples? Those poor people just left the White House, almost broke.
I've never heard of an advance that big.
Oh, it's huge. But, I mean, the woman, she goes out. I mean, I've done this author thing. If you get 10 or 15 people at a book signing, it's a big deal. She sells tickets to hers. They're sold out. And tickets to a book signing, it is simply amazing. And it's interesting, a top aide to the former First Lady, however, is linked to the Jussie Smollett controversy. Prosecutors in Chicago sparking outrage Tuesday after dropping all charges against him. The Empire Star faced 16 indictments on charges of staging a hate crime, and now the mayor and the officials want answers. And let's find out, was there a Michelle Obama aide involved in that? Charlene Aaron has that report.
Chicago's mayor and police superintendent quickly blasted prosecutors' decision to make a deal in the Jussie Smollett case.
This is a whitewash of justice. In the end of the day, it's Mr. Smollett that committed this false claim.
You all know where I stand on this. Do I think justice was served? No.
Under the deal, Smollett did community service and will forfeit his $10,000 bond in exchange for no charges. In an interview with CBN News' Faith Nation program, conservative commentator Ben Shapiro offered possible reasons for the move by prosecutors.
Kim Foxx, who is the DA in this case, apparently was trying to intervene with CPD. She then supposedly recused herself, but it was her office that decided to let Smollett off.
Foxx recused herself after she came under scrutiny for trading messages about the case with Tina Chen, attorney and former chief of staff for Michelle Obama. One text message from Chen indicated she wanted to act on behalf of Smollett and his family. In January, Smollett told police 2 men beat him using racial and homophobic slurs, put a noose around his neck, and said, "This is MAGA country." After weeks of investigation, police say the Empire actor paid 2 brothers to stage the attack. A grand jury indicted him on 16 charges. Shapiro pointed out that Smollett's story has been questionable from the start.
His initial accusations about the accusers did not match the people who actually ended up apparently beating him up. The evidence is fairly clear.
Smollett maintains his innocence.
I've been truthful and consistent on every single level since day one. I would not be my mother's son if I was capable of one drop of what I have been accused of.
Prosecutors say dropping the charges doesn't mean Smollett is innocent.
This was not an exoneration. To say that he was exonerated by us or anyone else is not true.
Meanwhile, the FBI is still investigating whether Smollett mailed a threatening letter to himself. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Well, doesn't that smack of some kind of corruption? Well, the battle over Obamacare continues, and it could hurt the Republicans in the 2020 election. John Jessup has more on that.
Thanks, Pat. Democrats are honing in on health care and making it a central campaign issue as the Trump administration once again seeks to overturn Obamacare. House Democrats announcing a new bill to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, making more middle-class people eligible for subsidies and giving more aid to lower-income recipients already in the system. Monday, the Trump administration filed a brief in a federal appeals court to strike down the Obamacare law. But the president says that doesn't mean the Republicans want to take away people's health care.
The Republican Party will soon be known as the party of health care. You watch.
The bill should make it through the House, but not the Republican-controlled Senate. Pat, back to you.
Well, you know, that's what beat the Republicans. The president was so busy talking about the wall that he ignored the fact that the Democrats were playing health care, and they were really demagoguing it. They weren't telling the truth, but nevertheless, they were saying the Republicans wanted to strip out health care for pre-existing conditions. That wasn't true. The House of Representatives had a bill that they had passed that was going to take care of pre-existing conditions. But I tell you, Trump's got to get ahead of this one. It'll hurt unless he goes on the offensive. So what they've got to do is come out with a bill and make it very clear that this is what they stand for. And the biggest thing that the Democrats scared the people about during those congressional elections was pre-existing conditions. The Republicans are going to take away health care for pre-existing conditions. Well, that means a lot of people were scared that they'd lose their health care. But what the judge ruled was, very simply, that the individual mandate was an unconstitutional exercise of power, and he struck it down. Justice Department has said, we're going to stand with that. They will not appeal that ruling because we think that is correct. But, of course, that ruling has got to go before, you know, there was not what's called a severability provision. So if one major factor of the Affordable Care Act is struck down, that meant the whole law is going to be struck down. And, but again, it's a fine line, and trust me, there'll be political demagoguery we don't need. But what the president's going to have to do is stand up and make absolutely certain that the Congress of the Republicans in the House and the Republican-controlled Senate is going to have a law that will take care of pre-existing conditions, and there will be a better replacement than what has been struck down by that district court judge. John?
Pat, President Trump is taking an unprecedented step to protect America's electrical grid with a new executive order to prevent against electromagnetic pulses, also called EMPs. An EMP is a short burst of electromagnetic energy that can disrupt electronic equipment. At higher levels, an EMP can disrupt water and electrical supplies, taking down computer networks, banking systems, and air transportation, which could lead to millions dying over time from lack of money, food, water, and health care. While EMPs can be caused by flares shooting off the sun, Pat, some nations, as you know, have developed the technology for high-energy EMP weapons.
Well, I've been sounding this alarm now for several years, and I'm so glad the president's latched onto it. If there was a low-level nuclear blast over someplace near Chicago, it would literally shut down the electrical grid of the entire United States. And I'm talking about millions of people dying. And what is being proposed is the least expensive fix. And they need to harden that grid. And we also found that there are people who can hack the grid and cause disruptions. So there needs to be cyber defense against that kind of thing. But it's simply, I mean, so you spend a couple $1 billion on it. It's nothing, but if we lose our electrical power, this country is in desperate condition, not able to mount a defense against a military attacker, and millions, I mean millions, would die. You couldn't have refrigeration, your cars wouldn't start, and you go down the line, it would be horrible. So thank goodness the president is doing that, but it needs to be put into effect immediately. John?
Pat, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff is doubling down on investigating President Trump, saying undoubtedly there is collusion, despite the Mueller report stating it found no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. The Justice Department says it will release as much of the report as it can within a few weeks. Meanwhile, some say the Mueller investigation highlights problems with the law establishing a special prosecutor. Gary Lane explains.
The end of the Mueller investigation may mark the beginning of an effort to change the special prosecutor law. President Trump says he wants to protect the country and future presidents from going through what he's endured over the past 22 months.
This should never happen to a president again. We can't allow that to take place.
Congress created the Office of Independent Counsel in 1978 in response to the Watergate scandal. Today, called special counsels, they're appointed at the discretion of the U.S. Attorney General, usually at the request of Congress. Often, special counsels end up indicting people for crimes unrelated to the original mandate. In the case of Mueller, Paul Manafort was convicted for bank fraud and filing a false tax return. Former Trump attorney Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to bank and tax fraud and violating campaign finance laws. During the George W. Bush presidency, presidential assistant Scooter Libby was convicted of obstruction, making false statements and perjury, not for leaking the identity of former CIA agent Valerie Plame. And President Clinton was impeached for perjury and obstructing justice. The original mandate of Special Prosecutor Ken Starr was to investigate Clinton's Whitewater real estate investments. Many Americans believe politicians use special counsels for partisan purposes, only to damage and lessen the effectiveness of a president. President Trump, who called the Russia investigation a witch hunt, had this to say about Robert Mueller.
Mr. President, do you think Robert Mueller acted honorably? Yes.
And some would argue Mueller acted legally. In 1978, the U.S. Supreme Court declared the independent counsel law constitutional. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia dissented, warning, quote, "I fear the court has permanently encumbered the republic with an institution that will do it great harm." The Mueller investigation cost to taxpayers at least $25 million, and the cost to the American psyche is perhaps much greater.
And Pat, given that there's a divided Congress, it's unlikely that law will change.
Well, I've got Mark Martin. He's the former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. He's now the Dean of Regional University Law School. And Mr. Chief Justice, Your Honor, Dean, so glad you're here. Tell me about your feeling on this problem. What are the main problems with this independent counsel law?
Well, first of all, serious concerns of constitutionality were raised by the late Justice Scalia. And I think his warning about the damage that could be done to our republic, that we see that in the current situation.
Sure.
We see almost half of a term of a United States president being interfered with through this process. And so the predecessor to the current procedural regulation that Janet Reno issued in 1999 was an independent counsel provision in the Ethics in Government Act of 1978. So one of the key problems is we have a mere regulation. We have a one-word standard that determines whether a special counsel can be authorized.
What's the one word?
Warranted. Now, that is the one word that caused $25 million to be spent. And if we consider the parallel congressional investigations, 2 Senate committees and 1 House committee, $67 million. So we need immediate review of this law, this procedural regulation, to toughen up that standard.
Why do you think the Supreme Court validated it?
Well, there are strong practical reasons to have the ability, particularly when you have this type of conflict of interest. In fact, the Attorney General serves at the pleasure of the President. And so we're talking about an investigation of a president or a high-level official in the executive branch.
Well, do you think that we should have another special counsel like Lindsey Graham suggested to investigate the Justice Department?
Well, it's an interesting question because the process did not work well this time around. I do agree with Ken Starr that ultimately the rule of law was vindicated and the president was exonerated. There was absolutely no evidence of Russian collusion, despite what Adam Schiff may say.
Yeah.
And also, we learned that there was no obstruction. And that was a ruling of both the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein.
Well, you know, the president said, I hope this never happens to another president, that he gets misused the way I have been. How can we, what should we do to change this thing?
You know, just imagine, as an aside, you decide to run for president, and all of a sudden your entire family, your own son, is exposed to an unfair investigation.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that way. We have so over-criminalized the American political system. And this should never happen again. And the president is absolutely correct. And we can make sure it doesn't happen again by appointing a blue ribbon commission.
Right.
Attorney General Barr has the authority tomorrow to change this law. It is a procedural regulation of the Justice Department.
It's a procedural regulation. It's not something that Congress has set up?
It is not a statute. The independent counsel provision of the Ethics in Government Act expired by its own terms in 1999. At that point, Attorney General Janet Reno issued a regulation that has now been enforced for 20 years.
So it's merely a regulation put in by a former Attorney General?
That's exactly right.
I don't think any of the American people don't know that.
Well, they need to know that, because Attorney General Barr could rescind the rule. He can toughen up the rule. 28 CFR 600.1. That's where the term warranted appears. We should have a much tougher basis, a much tougher standard for this. There should be substantial evidence to, number one, show that a crime has been committed and that a person of interest committed it.
Well, God bless you. Well, I appreciate this. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here, because I didn't realize where that thing came from, but the damage that can be done is horrible. I'm so glad you're here with us. You're enjoying your stay at Regent, I hope.
I absolutely am. And if students want an education at a law school where the faculty really cares about the students, and they will have a great job and have a great chance passing the bar in any of the 50 states, they need to consider Regent Law School.
Thank you, sir.